What's up, guys? Welcome back. This is JonJonTheWise, and I got another Cyberpunk Red video for you guys. This is another episode of the exclusive Patreon content, Building an Epic Cyberpunk Red Campaign. This is episode 4. It's going to be the final episode, and if you're watching this and you're a patron, I want to thank you so much for the support, and stay tuned for some more exclusive content. But before we get deep into this video, make sure you guys join the Discord community. The link will be in the description below. It's a Cyberpunk Red 2020 fan Discord waiting for you to join so we can talk more about Cyberpunk. Make sure you guys subscribe to the podcast Tabletop Cyberpunk, where I talk more about Cyberpunk, and it's free. You can find it anywhere, Spotify, iTunes, etc. And if you guys want to help me out, go to patreon.com/JonJonTheWise. If you're watching this in the future, if you're a patron, thank you so much. This is the greatest way to help me out. I really, really appreciate the love that I've been getting from the patrons. Thank you so much. You guys drive me. And make sure you guys follow me on social media at JonJonTheWise. I am on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of them. Twitter, yeah, all of them at JonJonTheWise. Let's connect. All right. Now, let's get into this video. Thank you so much for being a part of this. This is going to be the final episode of Building an Epic Cyberpunk Red Campaign. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about how to plan each session. If you guys have followed me throughout this series and you have gotten to this point, then this is the last piece of advice I can really give you to send you on your way. From here on, you guys will be taking the advice that I'm giving you from this video, building each session one by one until you finally reach the end of your epic campaign, and then you do it all over again, right? Because that's the best part about it. So let's get straight into it. Now, before we get into the meat of the video, I just want to give you guys a little bit of a preface to talk about what it's like being a game master. Being a game master is a skill that you will develop over time through experience, through repetition, and through making a lot of mistakes. And it's one of those things that it's a pursuit. It's a scholarly pursuit. You read books, you change things, you get advice from people, and don't sweat it too much, especially if you're new and you're worried about doing a poor job. If you just put a little bit of effort, your players will greatly appreciate it. Remember that perfection is impossible, but the pursuit of perfection is where something special can really happen. So if you really put in the work and you try to do your best, it'll always have some kind of positive result when it comes to tabletop gaming, because most of the time your players are just happy to be able to play. And sometimes through our preparations as a game master, we forget one key concept, and that concept is we're supposed to have fun as well. So remember that you're also supposed to have fun, and your players are supposed to have fun. Everyone's supposed to have fun. So keep that in mind as you guys are watching this video and listening to my advice. All right, the first thing we're going to be talking about is structure, the structure of each session. Every session, just like any video that you've seen before this, has a structure, has a formula, has a way that you can do things, in my opinion. Once again, this is a video on how I do things. This series is how I do things. So if there are any of you out there that disagree, I completely understand. This is all just from my perspective. So let's talk about structure. The first major thing that I can tell you guys about structure is to make sure that your sessions are organized in scenes, like a movie. Scenes are supposed to be places and settings that your players interact with and hang out at. And that's where the bulk of the role play and action will happen. As they go from one place to another, they're going from one scene to another scene. Now, some scenes will just be role play heavy. They'll just be a place where you go and you talk to NPCs. And some scenes will be combat heavy, where it's a place where it's only meant to have a combat encounter. And of course, some of them will be a combination of both of them. But either way, it's a place where your players go to interact using the game mechanics. So when you're preparing for session 1, I always prepare 4 scenes. Now remember, I said one of them could be a combat encounter. The other 3 can just be regular scenes. The idea is that my players will go through 1 scene and 1 combat encounter, or 2 scenes and a combat encounter, or if it's just a really role play heavy part of the campaign, we might be doing 2 or 3 scenes. Now, why do I prepare 4? That's just in case we zoom through one of these scenes, one of these places, and they just get straight through it. And I don't want to be caught with my pants around my ankles. I want to make sure that I have something at least a little bit prepared so we can go not too off the cuff. Now, if you want to prepare your scenes, the best way to prepare them is to use your combined plot chart from the past videos and your sentence, your main overarching plot and an overarching campaign plot. With the plot chart and your sentence, you guys should be able to craft every single scene one by one foot in front of the other, and make sure that each one of these scenes organically connect. They lead to each other. One place will lead to another, then another, then another, and before you know it, you're at the end of your campaign. So using the first block in my combined plot chart, let's use it as an example. I'm going to be using this example throughout the video to give you guys an idea of how I would prepare my scenes and my sessions. So the example is Patrick O'Hannigan meets the Austin atrocity that have been ravaged by Biotechnica forces, and the atrocity are allied with Patrick. They are deeply sorry about what happened to his wife and also give him information about his wife's murder. They introduce him to Joe, who is a solo that's looking for a hitman that goes by the same name as the hitman that killed Patrick's wife. All right? So that was the first box in our combined plot chart. Now, how does that translate to our first session and the different scenes that are involved with it? Well, this is exactly how it goes. So in the first scene, they got to meet somewhere that Patrick has to meet the Austin atrocity somewhere. So it has to be a place where he can meet these people. Then from there, scene 2, the atrocity take Patrick to a place where Joe the Solo, a friend of theirs, mentioned the same hitman that killed Patrick's wife. So he meets the atrocity. That's one scene. Then the atrocity take him somewhere else to meet their buddy Joe. And that's when I got a great idea. It's perfect for a combat encounter to have scene 3 be a combat encounter. So they go to meet the atrocity, then the atrocity take him to Joe. Well, Joe's not there. Why is Joe not there? Because Joe the Solo is ambushed by some rivals right when Patrick meets him, or maybe Joe has been kidnapped and Patrick needs to rescue him. The latter is better because that means that it can lead to another scene, which will be a combat encounter. So we're going from one place to another place, and there's more things to uncover. There's skill checks that your players can do. There's different kind of player agency. And as you can see throughout my scenes, I haven't said exactly where it's going to be. The first scene, you can prepare. You can have some place that it's going to be. But everything else after that, the players are going to be dictating where they're going with the story. So you don't want to put it down on paper too hard. You know what I mean? You don't want it to be set in stone. But as we go throughout this video, I'll give you guys more examples of how I flesh this out. But basically, that's it. I just did 4 scenes. I prepared. Now let's get deeper into our preparation so it has a little bit more substance to it. So as we are going to prepare our scenes, we have our outline. Now we got to fill out each thing. We know where Patrick's going to meet the Austin atrocity. We know where the Austin atrocities, they're going to take him somewhere. And then they're going to find out that Joe the Solo's not there. And then once again, they're going to have to go somewhere else to rescue Joe the Solo. So these are different places. We got to have things in these scenes, and one of the major parts of every scene is NPCs, non-player characters. These are allies, these are enemies, and these are neutral NPCs. All 3 of those types are the main types that you'll be seeing throughout your Cyberpunk Red campaign, and those are the 3 types that you should be preparing for. So one of the first NPC types are player backstory NPCs. These are people that we have taken from your different players' backstory, whether they're enemies, allies, or neutral. These are a part of your players. They're connected to them. So make sure you're sprinkling these people throughout the scenes. And sometimes they can be very important, and sometimes they can just be there just for flavor. The second type of NPCs are plot NPCs. Now, like I said earlier, these can be from your player's backstory, but they don't necessarily have to be. These are people that facilitate the plot. They move the plot along. They are the ones that give you the players the plot hooks that they need to be able to move on and move this story along. Most of the time, they're informing the players of what your sentence is all about, which is the overarching mission, or sometimes they give them small side missions and favors that might actually feed into helping them in the major campaign and the major story that they're trying to solve. Now, other than your player NPCs that are from their backstory and NPCs that give you plot hooks and facilitate the plot, everybody else there is just to give the specific scene that they are in flavor. For example, these are your bartenders, these are your mechanics, these are your police officers, these are the people that are the bar patrons, they're the people that are around the other NPCs that are important and your players, and they're just there to make sure that your players feel like they're in a living world. It's not just them and the NPCs, it's them, the NPCs, and the entire world all around them. And don't work too hard on these outward NPCs. You don't have to give crazy descriptions. You don't have to talk about what kind of suit each corporate is wearing and what kind of gun each booster is sporting. You just give general descriptions that there are other patrons of all kinds of types. And unless it adds to the flavor of the scene, there's no need to get too deep into it. Now, here's some examples. The Austin Atrocity, they're allies. They move the plot forward. Only one of them is really going to be the important NPC. This is the one that is having conversations with Patrick and the players, while the other Austin Atrocity are just there for flavor. They're just to make you feel like that there is an actual gang. It's not just this one person that's talking. Next, it's the bartender. This is a neutral, interesting NPC that will interact with the players, but only to get a drink from them, take their order, and to remind the players where they are, where the scene is, where it's taking place. And finally, bar patrons. These are neutral NPCs. They are just there to add flavor. Like I said before, they're eating, drinking, making noise, starting fights with another waitress, whatever it is. They're all around you, and they're just doing mundane, normal cyberpunk thing. All right, now that we talked about the NPCs that you're going to be having within your scenes, the next part of your scenes are events. And this is stuff that is happening within the scene to make it feel like it's not just a normal, mundane place. That, like I said before, it is a living world. We're trying to give our players immersion. So we want them to know that whether they are there or not, things are happening in this area, in this scene, in this world. Things are happening whether they are part of it or not. Now, sometimes these events can be part of the plot. They can be something that was triggered because of something the players did and they move the plot along, they facilitate it. But sometimes it could just be something mundane that gives the players a sense of immersion and feeling like they're a part of something bigger. For example, some types of events are a small indie band is playing at the bar, a table of corporates are playing poker with a couple of boosters that are sizing them up, or the bartender cuts someone off because they're too drunk. That's an event. It's not something wild and crazy, but it's enough to let people know or let your players know that the world around them is the wheels are turning. All right, the next part of your scenes are player role specific interactions. Now, what do I mean by this? You always have to make sure that you keep your players in mind in your preparations, especially if you have someone like a net runner. You want to make sure that you have a net run available for your players. And this is a great way to give your players other options to move the plot along other than the one path that you have prepared or maybe branching paths. The net running, the techie fixing things, let the med tech heal somebody, let the cop do what cops do. And these are all interactions that you have placed. While they might seem like they're random or unpredicted or off the cuff, this is something that you added in to make your players feel like they are useful, that the role that they play in this party, in this game, there's a use to it. And it also makes them feel like they're in control of how the story is moving along because of how useful they are to the party. Now, the final part of a scene is to remember to keep it cyberpunk. Sometimes we get a little bit too caught up on how real the world can be, and we don't remember to keep things cyberpunk. And this helps your players, feel the immersion, like they're in this cyberpunk world. So you want to make sure that you add little small details in there that give them an idea of what kind of world they're living in. For example, the bartender is completely covered in chrome. The drinks are poured from a robotic arm that's connected to the table that the players are sitting in. It's like a little robotic arm. It pours their drinks at the table. That's something futuristic. It's not just somebody bringing you drinks. Or finally, the indie band that's on stage is actually an augmented reality hologram, and the actual band is broadcasting from Russia or some other country. All right, so now we know how we can structure our scenes, how many scenes we need to make, what we need to inject within them. And before we really get to writing, there's some philosophies and mentalities that you guys need to keep in mind to make sure that it's an enjoyable experience for everybody. Number one, what I'm really trying to talk about here is player agency and railroading. Sometimes we prepare our paths and we prepare the story in such a way, and we might accidentally be telling our players that, hey, this is the path you're supposed to take, and if you take any other path, then you're not going to be successful. And that's where players feel like they're just playing your story, they're not involved in any way, and their decisions mean nothing. And that's not what you want. You don't want your players to ever feel that way. You want them to feel like their decisions matter, they're making a difference, and you want them to feel like they have options. So let's get into it. The first thing you got to remember is Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and it'll be because of your players. Your players will make sure that things do not go according to plan. So plan to not have a plan is my best advice that I can give you. Do the preparation, do the work. That will give you enough area to be able to improvise because you have something in your back pocket the entire time. So next, you want to make sure that you give your players multiple options. NPCs will give them rumors, they'll give them things that are doubtful, they're not sure, and they'll give them different sides of the story. Make sure that they know that the story they're getting from somebody is just one side of the story. Let them know there's consequences to their actions. Let them know there's consequences to their decisions, whether that's good or bad. You never want them to feel like they have no choice but to take your plot hook to move this story along. You always want them to feel like they can always take multiple paths and they can always use their creativity and cunning to move the plot along. So maybe you have that NPC that gives them the information they need, but then you have another NPC that contradicts it, and that's where they have to decide who they want to believe and how they want to move forward with the story. Next, you want to make sure that your players know that they are the ones that can decide how the plot moves forward. And you definitely want to make sure that you do this. This is very important for player agency. There's going to be a point in the game where you give the players the mission, the quest, whatever you want to call it. You give them the, hey, you got to do this and then this will happen. And from then on, it's your player's responsibility to figure out how to come up with the solution. Sometimes I don't even have a solution because there's no need to have a solution. The players will figure it out on their own, and I'll adjust the story according to how they do it. So sometimes I'll just ask a one-sided question where I don't know if they're actually going to be able to respond to it correctly. I just say, I give them a quest, they figure it out, and I adjust to it. Then that makes them feel like their decisions are what moves the plot along, which actually is the truth. It is their decisions that moves the plot along because there's nothing at the end of the road. I haven't prepared it yet. I'm hoping that they give me some good ideas with their own cunning and wit, and I'll be inspired to be able to use that to make a great story with them. Another great way to guide your players is to give them a guide NPC. I've talked about it in the past, but this is an NPC that is allied with the players. The players can trust them. They feel like they're important to them, and the players will listen to this NPC. This is your way as the game master to be able to talk to the players and the characters indirectly. You tell the NPC what to do, the NPC tells the players. Now, you don't want the NPC to be solving any problems. You don't want the NPC to be making any decisions. They're just there to whisper, to give seeds of doubt, to give information that maybe the players don't know themselves, but their characters would know. There's certain things that the players don't know about the world, but if their characters have been living in Night City for 20 years, they know more about it than the players actually do. And the guide NPC will be there to help facilitate that. Next, you want to make sure that you let your creativity flow. You got to be able to make decisions on the fly. Sometimes the players will give you an idea. They'll be like, "Oh, don't tell me this booster was actually the boss that we've been after this entire time." And you didn't have that planned, but they inspired you and they sparked something, and you know what you had planned. So you decide to yourself, "Oh, you know what? That would actually work perfect because they're going to be going to this next place and I could just switch things around." And there you go. Your players have just inspired you to change the entire plot and to make things a little bit different. So always be open for player creativity and your own creativity to change things. Preparation is just there so you don't have to waste time and say, "I don't know what's next." You always have an answer for your players, and basically you guys can play as long as you need to. My final advice is to make sure that you reskin your scenes. If your players muck things up, which, like I said before, they will. If they were supposed to go to a gang hideout and they decided they wanted to go to a bar to follow a lead, well, guess where the gangs hang out now? They hang out at that bar. It's no longer that other hideout that you had planned. Maybe they're after corporates instead of the gang. So now the people and the NPC stats and personalities that you had, all that is now what the corporates are. Now they behave that way. Maybe change a few things here and there to make sure it's consistent with the lore. But basically, don't be afraid to change locations, to have different names or use the same names to make sure that the players don't feel like they have to go the other way, another path. You let them decide and you change things accordingly to make sure that it's consistent with what they'd like to do. And remember, no plot point is safe from players mucking it up. If you want your players to take a plot point or a plot hook or a big clue, it doesn't just have to be the main NPC that they were supposed to meet up and then they decided, "Oh, we're not going to meet up with that NPC, we're going to go somewhere else." Well, they go somewhere else, they fight some bad guys. In the bad guy's pocket is a scribbled note with the clue that they've been looking for. So don't be afraid to do something like that too, where the plot can be changed, the way that it's delivered, and your players can figure it out in some different type of way. All right, now this next section I separated from the other pieces of advice because I feel like this is a very important section that needs to be on its own. I've just told you guys different ways how you can prepare your scene, how much work you're supposed to do, in my opinion. And you might be looking at that and thinking like, "Oh man, I have so much I need to do. There's so many things that I need to do to prepare." Well, I'm here to tell you that that's actually not true. Less is more. Now, let me explain to you guys what I mean by that. Because your players will be changing things and molding the story their own way, it's actually not worth it to prepare everything in advance. I mean, every single detail, there's no need for you to prepare that, because what ends up happening is the players will totally disregard anything you prepared and they'll go their own path. And that might lead you to decide that you're going to move your players into the direction that you had originally planned, and you might do it a little bit with a heavy hand, and it makes the players feel like their decisions mean nothing. And you might just do this because you're like, "I put in all this work. How am I going to just disregard all this work that I did?" Well, if you just didn't do all that work and you kept it a little more simple, you wouldn't be too married to that idea that you decided for your players. You won't be so attached to it, and you'll be okay with the players changing things. Remember that bullet points are your friend. All right. You want to make sure that you jot down basic ideas on exactly what you think things will go like. Remember, you're not planning what your players are going to do. You're planning what you think your players are going to do. They're going to talk to this guy. This guy's going to tell them this thing, which is going to lead them to over here. And hopefully, if all things go well, they will do the thing that I planned for them to do. Now, that's it. That's like a few bullet points, 3 or 4 bullet points with a few names here and there and some details. That way, you jot some things down and you rely on your players and their creativity. You basically rely on what they say to fill in the gaps where you're not sure exactly what's going to happen in the rest of the story. And basically what happens is it's a cooperative storytelling experience where you have prepared some general ideas, you don't know how to solve the problems that you have proposed, and your players solve the problems, and then they give you questions that you didn't even think about, and before you know it, you mix it together and you make this beautiful tapestry of fun. All right, now before we conclude this video, I want to give you guys some extra tools that I use throughout my campaign to help me out with player immersion, helping me with scenes and everything else. So the first thing, of course, on everybody's mind is battle maps. Battle maps are great for combat and heists. They serve as an interactive visualization of the scene that they're currently in. They can interact with it. They're here, they can see it. And sometimes that's a little too limiting because it doesn't leave anything open for their imagination. But sometimes that's okay because if it's a combat encounter, it's more tactical. You want them to know exactly where they can hide and exactly where they're going to be in danger. So battle maps are good in that sense for helping you with a scene. Next is static images. Sometimes like the saying says, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Just showing your players one static image of a map or a landscape or something that you put together with some text and some background lets your players know where they are, and then they can fill in the gaps with their imagination. Especially if you're playing theater of the mind, this is really great. A great way to do things is you just show them one little image and it takes them there. You take them on a journey to the place that you want them to be, the scene that you want them to be in, and it helps with player immersion, especially if you can't find a battle map to perfectly convey everything. There is a plethora of Google images out there of landscapes and backgrounds from amazing artists that you can hand out to your players so they can see what kind of world they're in. My next tool is readouts, and this is something that you'll see in a lot of traditional RPG adventure books. When they get to a scene, there's a little bit of a narration from the narrator where they give them an idea about what this world is like, what this place is like. I think that this is a really great tool, and it's a great way of hyper focusing your players on exactly where they are. You want to make sure when you're describing the place that you're not using word salad and inefficient words. You want it straight to the point. You want to be able to make sure that every sentence paints a picture for your players, and you give them a little bit of a readout to make them understand exactly where they are, who they're with, their surroundings, the sights, smells, sounds, all these things that you can say within a readout. And if you have a really good reading voice or a narration voice, this gives your players a sense of they're part of a book or an audio book or audio drama, and it really immerses them into the world. Next up, we have music. This is something that a lot of people use throughout their campaigns. I think it's a really important part of playing. If there's no music, it feels a little bit dull. Overusing music can be bad as well. You don't want music with lyrics. Most of the time you don't want that, but you just want some kind of music to help with role play and combat and immersion. Music is a great way to connect people to emotion, and I personally like to handpick specific types of music for specific types of scenarios like combat or mysterious investigations or suspense. All of these, I handpick them and I put them in separate categories, while others, they might have a playlist of great music. You just press play and you go along with your campaign. Either way, make sure that music is there to help connect your players to the emotion and intentions that you have for the scene and the campaign. Finally, the luck of the dice is a major part of the tools that I use. D10, D6, D3, and flipping a coin, which is pretty much a D2. These are different ways that I make decisions. There's going to be times that I'm not exactly sure where they're supposed to go or where the grenade is supposed to land when they miss. And I'll roll a D10 or a D6 or a D3 to give me an idea about what kind of decision I want to make. What's cool about this is you leave it to the chaos of chance, and your players see you doing that, and they realize, you're the GM, you didn't have the answers, and instead of making a weird call at the time, you all agree to, hey, we're just going to let chaos decide what we're going to do. And usually that ends up being a really fun result because none of you knew what it was going to be. All right, guys, that's about it. Thank you so much for watching this campaign. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you to all my patrons and all of you in YouTube for supporting, your likes, your comments. It means so much to me. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have amazing campaigns. Please share them with me, especially in the Discord. Our community would love to hear about your campaigns, your homebrew ideas, and everything. Remember to have fun. Remember to be creative. Don't be married to your ideas. And always, always, always remember to keep it cyberpunk. All right? We'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for more exclusive content. Take care. Bye.